A single moment frozen in time, a royal guard's hand raised in protocol, a queen consort reaching forward, a young prince caught between duty and family. What happened in those 5 seconds would shake the foundations of the British monarchy and reveal tensions that had been brewing for years. Behind palace walls, the morning of June 15th, 2024, started like any other ceremonial day at Buckingham Palace. The sun cast golden rays across the palace courtyard as preparations were underway for the annual Trooping the Color ceremony. Staff members moved with practiced efficiency, arranging seating and checking security protocols. The air buzzed with anticipation as crowds began gathering along the mall, hoping for glimpses of the royal family. Inside the palace walls, Catherine, Princess of Wales, stood in a private chamber adjusting the collar of her young son's uniform. Prince Louis, now 6 years old, fidgeted with excitement. His small hands couldn't stay still as he peered out the tall windows at the gathering crowds below. Catherine smiled warmly at her youngest child, her gentle hands smoothing down his hair that refused to cooperate despite multiple attempts. The relationship between Catherine and her children had always been a subject of public admiration. Photographers and royal watchers consistently praised her hands-on approach to motherhood, a stark contrast to the more distant parenting style of previous royal generations. She was often seen kneeling to their level during public events, holding their hands, offering reassuring touches when the spotlight became overwhelming. This maternal warmth had endeared her to millions worldwide. Down the corridor, in another chamber, Queen Consort Camilla prepared for the day's events with her own team of attendants. Since her coronation alongside King Charles III in May 2023, she had been navigating the complex waters of her new role. The position came with expectations, traditions, and an ever-watchful public eye. Some embraced her as Queen Consort, while others remained skeptical, their memories long and their judgments firmly set. The relationship between Camilla and Catherine had always been described by palace insiders as cordial but complicated. They represented different eras, different approaches, and different public perceptions. While Catherine embodied modern royal motherhood and generated overwhelming public support, Camilla carried decades of controversial history. The two women had learned to coexist in their roles, maintaining professional courtesy at public events while keeping appropriate distance in private matters. As the hour approached for the family to gather, palace protocol officers moved through the halls with clipboards and radios, coordinating every minute detail. The Trooping the Color was not merely a parade, but a precisely choreographed demonstration of military precision and royal tradition. Every member of the family had an assigned position, a specific time to appear, and a role to fulfill in the larger spectacle. Prince Louis had been particularly excited about this year's ceremony. At 6 years old, he was finally old enough to understand the significance of the event, and young enough to find the soldiers, horses, and pageantry absolutely thrilling. During breakfast that morning, he had peppered his mother with questions. Why did the soldiers wear such tall hats? How heavy were the drums? Could he wave at every single person in the crowd? Catherine had answered each question with patient amusement, recognizing her son's genuine enthusiasm. The designated gathering point was the Grand Hall, where the family would assemble before proceeding to the carriages. Security had been checked and rechecked. Royal protection officers positioned themselves at strategic points throughout the palace. Among them was Officer James Mitchell, a 15-year veteran of the Royal Protection Unit. Mitchell had served through 3 different monarchs and understood that his primary duty was to protocol and the safety of the immediate line of succession. His training had been exhaustive, covering not just physical threats, but also the intricate details of royal hierarchy and procedure. As family members began arriving at the Grand Hall, the atmosphere shifted from preparation to performance. Prince William arrived first with Princess Charlotte and Prince George, both children looking slightly more serious than their younger brother. Charlotte's dress was perfectly pressed. George wore his suit with the uncomfortable formality of a young boy trying to meet expectations. William exchanged quiet words with his children, checking that they were ready for the hours ahead. Catherine entered moments later with Louis, whose earlier enthusiasm was now mixing with the nervousness that came from seeing the full weight of royal ceremony assembling around him. His small hand gripped his mother's tightly. She leaned down, whispering something in his ear that made him smile slightly. These small moments of maternal comfort were Catherine's specialty, captured countless times by photographers and treasured by a public that saw in her a refreshing authenticity. King Charles arrived with Queen Consort Camilla, both dressed in formal attire befitting the occasion. Charles reviewed last-minute details with his private secretary while Camilla surveyed the assembled family. Her gaze moved across the room, taking in the children, the adults, the carefully managed presentation of royal unity. Whatever thoughts passed through her mind remained hidden behind the practiced smile. She had perfected over decades in the public eye. The protocol officer announced that it was time to proceed to the carriages. The family would travel in a specific order, each carriage carefully arranged to demonstrate hierarchy while also considering public relations and family dynamics. This was where centuries of tradition met modern considerations. Who sat with whom sent messages, intentional or not, to observers both casual and obsessive. As the family began moving toward the palace doors, Louis suddenly stopped. His earlier excitement had transformed into visible anxiety as the reality of the crowds and cameras waiting outside fully registered. He pulled back slightly on his mother's hand, his 6-year-old confidence wavering. Catherine immediately noticed, stopping to crouch beside him despite the elaborate dress she wore and the schedule they needed to maintain. The moment caught everyone's attention. William paused, recognizing the familiar scene of his wife managing one of their children's understandable nervousness. George and Charlotte, having experienced similar moments themselves in previous years, watched with sibling understanding. Palace staff froze in their positions, trained to never interfere in family matters unless absolutely necessary. King Charles glanced over, his expression a mixture of grandfatherly concern and royal impatience with delays. It was then that Camilla made her move. Whether motivated by a desire to help, an impulse to demonstrate authority, or simply an automatic response to a child's distress, she stepped forward from her position beside Charles. Her hand extended toward Louis, her voice carrying across the marble floors as she offered to take the young prince to the carriage herself. The offer seemed reasonable on its surface. She was the queen consort, after all, and helping with family matters could be seen as natural. But Catherine's reaction was immediate and telling. Her body language shifted subtly but unmistakably as she maintained her protective position beside Louis. Her hand on her son's shoulder tightened slightly. Not in aggression, but in maternal assertion. She straightened while keeping Louis close. Her voice calm but firm as she thanked Camilla for the offer and indicated that she had the situation well in hand. The exchange lasted only seconds, but those present felt the undercurrent of something. Deeper than a simple disagreement about who would escort a child to a carriage, Camilla, however, didn't step back. Instead, she moved closer, her hand still extended toward Louis. She repeated her offer, this time with a tone that suggested it was not merely a suggestion but an expectation. In her mind, perhaps, this was her role now as queen consort. To assist in family matters, to demonstrate unity and capability. Or perhaps deeper motivations were at play, conscious or unconscious desires to assert position within a family structure that had never fully embraced her. Louis looked between his mother and the approaching figure of Camilla with growing confusion. At 6 years old, he understood hierarchy in the abstract way children do. But his instinct in moments of stress was clear and unchanging. He wanted his mother. He pressed closer to Catherine's side, his small hand now gripping the fabric of her dress. The tension in the grand hall became palpable as other family members watched the scene unfold, uncertain whether to intervene or maintain the facade of normalcy. Catherine's protective instincts fully engaged. She moved Louis slightly behind her, a subtle but clear physical statement. Her words remained respectful in tone, but absolute in content as she once again declined Camilla's assistance. The Princess of Wales had navigated countless difficult public situations with grace. But when it came to her children, there was a line that could not be crossed. That line was being tested now in full view of palace staff, security personnel, and family members. The situation escalated when Camilla, perhaps frustrated by the refusal or operating on some internal script of how this should proceed, reached out more directly. Her hand moved toward Louis, not aggressively but with clear intent to take the child's arm and guide him herself. It was a gesture that might have seemed helpful to an outside observer. But in the context of the moment, with Catherine already managing the situation, it represented an override of parental authority. Officer James Mitchell had been standing at his designated position near the entrance to the Grand Hall. His training and years of experience had developed in him an almost supernatural awareness of body language, spatial dynamics, and potential security concerns. What he witnessed now triggered multiple protocols in his mind simultaneously. He saw the queen consort moving toward a young prince in the direct line of succession. He saw that prince's mother, the Princess of Wales, clearly attempting to maintain control of her own child. He saw the physical space between them closing in a way that suggested potential for an uncomfortable situation. Mitchell's role was complex in such moments. He was not merely a bodyguard, but a guardian of protocol, a living embodiment of centuries of tradition regarding how royals interacted, particularly concerning the line of succession. Prince Louis, as the third child of the Prince of Wales, stood fourth in line to the British throne. His position was protected not just by security measures against external threats, but by internal protocols, designed to maintain proper hierarchy and prevent any situation, however unlikely that could be construed as improper. The officer made his decision in a fraction of a second. He stepped forward with the practiced efficiency of someone who had trained for thousands of hours in the precise application of protocol. His movement was not aggressive or hurried, but absolutely definitive. He positioned himself physically between the queen consort and the young prince. His hand raised in the universal gesture of stop. His voice, trained to carry authority without shouting, announced clearly that the Princess of Wales had the situation with Prince Louis and no further assistance was required. The Grand Hall seemed to freeze. Staff members who had been moving with purposeful efficiency stopped in their tracks. Family members who had been watching the situation with growing discomfort now stared openly at the unprecedented scene before them. A royal protection officer had physically intervened to stop the queen consort from approaching a child. The implications rippled through every mind present like shockwaves through still water. Camilla stopped immediately, her hand suspended in mid-reach. Her expressions cycled through surprise, confusion, and then something harder to define. Was it embarrassment at being publicly corrected? Anger at the presumption of a security officer? Or perhaps a sudden, sharp awareness of her position in a hierarchy that she thought her coronation had fundamentally altered? Her face flushed slightly, visible even beneath the carefully applied makeup designed for the cameras waiting outside. King Charles, who had been consulting with his private secretary, turned at the sudden change in atmosphere. His eyes took in the scene with the quick assessment of a man who had spent his entire life navigating the impossible politics of royal family dynamics. He saw his wife stopped mid-gesture by a protection officer. He saw his daughter-in-law standing protectively over his grandson. He saw his youngest grandson looking confused and anxious. And he saw the staff and family members all waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would be resolved. The king's position was impossibly complicated. Camilla was his wife, his partner, through decades of controversy and public judgment, the woman he had fought to have recognized as queen consort. Catherine was his daughter-in-law, the future queen, the mother of future monarchs, arguably the most popular member of the royal family in current public polling. Louis was his grandson, a child whose well-being should transcend all other considerations. And Officer Mitchell was simply doing his job, following protocols that Charles himself had approved and understood to be necessary. Charles made the only choice available to a man in his position. He suggested calmly that they were running behind schedule and should proceed to the carriages immediately. His tone brooked no argument. It's the voice of a monarch who needed order restored to a situation that was threatening to spiral beyond control. It was a non-solution solution, pushing the problem forward rather than addressing it. But sometimes royal protocol was as much about what remained unspoken as what was proclaimed. Camilla stepped back, her hand dropping to her side. Her expression had settled into something carefully neutral. But those who knew her could see the tension in her jaw, the slight rigidity in her shoulders. She had been countermanded by a security officer in front of family and staff, her offer to help rejected multiple times. Her position as queen consort apparently insufficient to override a mother's authority over her own child. The humiliation, whether justified or not, was real and visible. Catherine, for her part, maintained her composure with the skill that had made her such an effective royal representative. She smoothed Louis's hair once more, whispered something reassuring to him, and then straightened with regal bearing. Her acknowledgment of the king's suggestion to proceed was gracious and immediate, demonstrating that, while she had stood firm on this particular boundary, she understood her place in the larger hierarchy. She took Louis's hand and began moving toward the exit, her children falling into step beside her. Officer Mitchell returned to his position, his face a professional mask that revealed nothing of whatever he might be thinking or feeling about what had just occurred. His intervention had been textbook correct according to protocol, but he was experienced enough to know that being correct didn't always shield one from consequences. He had physically stopped the queen consort of the United Kingdom. That moment would be discussed, analyzed, reported on, dissected in ways he couldn't yet imagine. As the family proceeded to the waiting carriages, the carefully maintained facade of unity was restored. To the crowds gathering outside, to the cameras positioned at every angle, to the millions who would watch the ceremony on television, the royal family would appear as they always did, at Trooping the Color, dignified, coordinated, and perfectly choreographed. But inside the carriages, in the spaces between public moments, the tension from the grand hall lingered like an unwelcome passenger. Louis sat pressed against his mother's side in their carriage, his earlier enthusiasm for the ceremony muted by the confusing scene he had witnessed but didn't fully understand. Children are remarkably perceptive of adult tensions even when they can't articulate what they're sensing. He knew something had happened, something that made the adults around him uncomfortable, something involving him but beyond his control. Catherine kept her arm around him, occasionally leaning down to point out interesting sights as they traveled toward Horse Guards Parade, deliberately working to restore his excitement for the day ahead. In another carriage, Camilla sat beside Charles with perfect posture and a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Whatever conversation they had, if any, was hidden from the staff and protection officers who traveled with them. Charles's expression gave nothing away. The practiced neutrality of a man who had spent 75 years learning to hide his true feelings behind appropriate public faces. But his hand rested on Camilla's, a small gesture of support or perhaps solidarity that spoke of their decades together. The ceremony itself proceeded flawlessly. The military precision, the magnificent horses, the coordinated movements of hundreds of soldiers, all came together in the spectacular display that had marked the monarch's official birthday for generations. The royal family appeared on the balcony of Buckingham Palace as tradition demanded, waving to the crowds below, standing for the national anthem, watching the RAF fly past overhead. To the public, it was another successful royal event, another demonstration of continuity and tradition in a rapidly changing world. But photographs from that day, analyzed later by eagle-eyed royal watchers, would reveal subtle tensions. The physical distance between Catherine and Camilla on the balcony was slightly greater than in previous years. Their interactions, usually cordial if not warm, were minimal to the point of noticeable. Louis stayed close to his mother throughout, his hand often in hers, his position never ambiguous. And in the background of several photographs, if one looked carefully, Officer Mitchell could be seen maintaining his professional vigilance, his presence a reminder of the incident that had occurred behind palace walls. News of the confrontation didn't break immediately. Palace staff were bound by strict confidentiality, agreements, and a deep understanding that discretion was fundamental to their positions. Royal protection officers were trained to be essentially invisible, present but never part of the story. And the family members themselves had every reason to keep the incident private, to maintain the carefully constructed image of unity that the monarchy relied upon for its very survival. But palaces leak. They always have and always will. Too many people witness too many things, and human nature being what it is, stories eventually find their way out. It started with whispers among the household staff, shared over tea in break rooms, where the extraordinary events of ordinary days were processed and discussed. Someone mentioned it to a friend who worked at another estate. That friend told someone else. The story began to spread like ripples in a pond, each telling, adding, or subtracting details, but the core remaining consistent. A tabloid journalist with palace contacts heard a version of the story 2 weeks after the Trooping the Color ceremony. He began investigating, making discreet inquiries, trying to confirm details without revealing what he knew or alerting palace communications staff to prepare countermeasures. He spoke with former palace employees who might have heard something. He analyzed photographs from the event, looking for visual evidence that might support the claims. He built his story piece by piece, knowing that if he got it wrong, his access and reputation would be destroyed. But if he got it right, it would be the royal story of the year. 3 weeks after the Trooping the Color ceremony, the story broke. The headline blazed across the front page of a major British tabloid with the sensational wording that would guarantee millions of clicks and countless conversations. The article detailed the confrontation in the Grand Hall with surprising accuracy, describing how Queen Consort Camilla had attempted to take Prince Louis from Princess Catherine, and how a royal protection officer had physically intervened to stop her. The story was carefully worded to avoid outright accusations, but loaded with implications that readers were invited to draw for themselves. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Social media platforms erupted with commentary from all sides. Royal supporters who had never fully accepted Camilla saw the story as confirmation of their worst suspicions about her position in the family and her relationship with William and Catherine's children. Those sympathetic to Camilla argued that the story had been blown out of proportion, that she had simply been trying to help with an overwhelmed child, and that the intervention was an overreaction born from outdated protocol. In the vast middle ground, people who followed royal news with casual interest, rather than passionate investment, found themselves drawn into debates about hierarchy, family dynamics, and the role of different royal members, Catherine supporters, and they numbered in the millions, rallied with fierce protective energy. Online forums filled with comments praising her for standing firm against what they characterized as inappropriate interference with her son. Mothers around the world related to the fundamental instinct to protect one's child from anyone, regardless of title or position. The phrase "no one gets between a mother and her child" trended across multiple platforms, shared and reshared with commentary memes. In passionate declarations of support, Camilla's position became increasingly difficult as the story dominated news cycles. Despite the support she received from some quarters, the overwhelming public sentiment appeared to side with Catherine. Old controversies resurfaced with renewed energy. Her history with Charles, circumstances that had brought her from mistress to wife to queen consort, was rehashed in articles, television discussions, and countless social media posts. Every past awkward interaction or perceived slight was re-examined through this new lens. Her public approval ratings, which had been gradually improving over years of careful public relations work, took a sharp downward turn. The palace initially attempted its standard response to royal controversies. The communications office issued a brief statement indicating that the royal family maintained excellent relationships across all members and that private family matters would remain private. It was the same non-denial denial that had served the monarchy through countless scandals, confirming nothing while denying nothing, attempting to starve the story of oxygen by refusing to engage with specifics. But this story had too much momentum and too many interested parties to simply fade away. Royal correspondents who relied on palace access for their careers found themselves in difficult positions. They couldn't ignore the biggest royal story in months, but aggressive reporting might cost them the relationships and sources they depended upon. Many threaded a careful needle, reporting the basic facts while adding context about protocol, royal hierarchy, and the complexities of modern royal family dynamics. Some pointed out that protection officers are specifically trained to prioritize the line of succession and that Officer Mitchell's intervention, while dramatic, was likely exactly what his training dictated television programs dedicated to royal coverage seized on the story with enthusiasm. Panels of experts, former palace staff members, body language analysts, and royal biographers dissected every known detail. Footage from the trooping, the color ceremony was replayed endlessly, with commentators pointing out subtle body language cues they claimed revealed underlying tensions. The balcony scene was analyzed frame by frame, with special attention paid to any interaction or lack thereof between Catherine and Camilla. Louis's demeanor throughout the day was discussed, with some suggesting he seemed more clingy than usual. Though 6-year-olds are naturally variable in their behavior and reading, deep meaning into a child's mood is always speculative at best. Inside the palace walls, the atmosphere was tense. The story had become a crisis that required management, but the usual tools for managing royal crises didn't quite apply. This wasn't a scandal involving improper behavior or financial irregularities. It was a family dispute that had played out according to established protocol, but had revealed fault lines in family relationships that the institution preferred to keep hidden. How could the palace restore the image of unity when the fundamental disagreement at the heart of the story touched on such sensitive issues of authority, motherhood, and position? King Charles found himself in an impossible position as both monarch and family member. As king, he needed to maintain the dignity and unity of the institution he led. As husband, he felt obligated to support Camilla, who he knew was suffering under the weight of public criticism. As father, he recognized William's family's right to manage their own children without interference. And as grandfather, he wanted only what was best for his grandchildren, including Louis, who had been at the center of this unwanted attention. Private conversations were held behind closed doors. Charles met with William to discuss the situation and its implications. William, protective of both his wife and his children, was reportedly firm in his position that Catherine had every right to decide who handled their children and when. He pointed out that Louis had been in no distress that Catherine couldn't manage, that the situation was well in hand, and that the intervention by Camilla had only complicated matters. William's popularity with the public and his position as heir made his perspective impossible to dismiss, even for a king who might have preferred a different resolution. Camilla, meanwhile, struggled with the public backlash. According to sources close to the royal household, she felt unfairly characterized by the coverage. In her view, she had been trying to help with a child who appeared distressed, acting on natural instinct in her role as queen consort to support family members. That this had been interpreted as overreach or inappropriate interference was, from her perspective, both hurtful and unjust. She had spent years working to be accepted in her role, undertaking countless public engagements, supporting Charles through his transition to king, and attempting to build relationships within a family that had never fully embraced her. Catherine maintained public silence on the matter, following the traditional royal approach of never complain, never explain. She continued with her scheduled engagements, appearing at charity events and public ceremonies with the same grace and warmth that had always characterized her public presence. When asked about the incident by reporters, which happened frequently, she simply smiled and redirected to whatever cause or event she was supporting that day. Her refusal to engage with the controversy only seemed to increase public support, with many viewing her silence as dignified restraint rather than avoidance. The impact on Louis himself became a concern for both his parents and palace officials. At 6 years old, he was old enough to sense the attention, but too young to fully understand its nature or origins. He knew something had happened at the palace before the big ceremony. He knew adults had been upset. He knew his name was being mentioned in contexts he didn't fully grasp. Catherine and William had to navigate how much to explain to their son about why his face was appearing in newspapers and why strangers seemed extra interested in him during public appearances. Child psychologists, royal experts, and parenting commentators weighed in on the situation from their various perspectives. Some argued that the incident demonstrated exactly why young royals needed protection from family politics and why clear boundaries around parenting decisions were essential. Others suggested that the whole situation had been blown out of proportion by media coverage and that the best thing for Loa would be for everyone to simply move on. The fact that a 6-year-old child had become a focal point in a royal controversy troubled many observers. regardless of which side of the dispute they supported. As weeks passed, the story began to evolve. New angles emerged as journalists dug deeper. Stories surfaced about previous tensions between Catherine and Camilla, most of which were difficult to verify, but fed the narrative of long-standing friction. Body language experts analyzed years of photographs, claiming to see evidence of discomfort or distance in interactions that had previously seemed unremarkable. Former palace staff members, some credible and others questionable, gave interviews describing the atmosphere within royal households and the complex dynamics between different branches of the family. One particularly detailed article explored the historical context of the situation, examining how royal families had handled similar tensions in the past. It noted that conflicts over children and parenting decisions were nothing new in royal history. Queen Elizabeth II had faced her own challenges in balancing her role as monarch with her role as mother and grandmother. The complexities of having one's parenting scrutinized by the public, the press, and even other family members were not unique to Catherine. Though the specific circumstances of her situation were modern in their particulars, the question of Officer Mitchell's career became another thread in the ongoing story. Had he faced any consequences for his intervention? Royal protection officers typically operated under strict confidentiality, so official information about his status was not forthcoming. Some sources suggested he had been privately commended for following protocol correctly. Others hinted that his action, while technically appropriate, had created diplomatic complications within the family that might affect his future assignments. The uncertainty around his situation became yet another element feeding speculation and discussion. Public opinion polls showed fascinating divisions in how different groups interpreted the incident. Women with children overwhelmingly supported Catherine's position, seeing it through the lens of maternal authority and boundaries. Older generations were more divided, with some supporting traditional hierarchies that would give the queen consort more deference. Younger people tended to frame the issue in terms of personal boundaries and consent, arguing that no one, regardless of title, had the right to override a parent's clearly expressed wishes regarding their child. The international dimension of the story added another layer of complexity. British media coverage differed significantly from how the incident was reported in other countries. American outlets tended to frame it as a clash between an established older generation and a modern, hands-on mother, often drawing parallels to similar family dynamics in non-royal contexts. European royal watchers compared the situation to dynamics in other monarchies, noting that most royal families faced similar tensions between tradition and contemporary parenting approaches. Commonwealth nations had their own perspectives, influenced by their varying relationships with the British monarchy and their own cultural values around family and authority. 2 months after the incident, the palace attempted a carefully orchestrated image rehabilitation effort. Charles and Camilla were photographed at a family gathering that included William, Catherine, and the children. The images released through official palace channels showed everyone smiling and apparently relaxed. Louis was visible in several photos, playing with his siblings while adults chatted in the background. The message was clear and deliberate. Whatever had happened, the family had moved past it. Unity was restored. Everything was fine, but public reception of these images was mixed. Some took them at face value, relieved to see evidence that family relationships had been repaired. Others analyzed them with skepticism, noting that smiling for cameras was literally part of royal job descriptions and proved nothing about authentic feelings or resolved tensions. The physical positioning in the photographs was scrutinized. Who stood next to whom? Who was touching whom? Were Catherine and Camilla photographed together directly, or were they always separated by other family members? Royal watchers treated the images like puzzles to be decoded, searching for hidden messages in every detail behind the scenes. According to sources with knowledge of palace operations, agreements had been reached about boundaries and protocols going forward, while official confirmation never came. The reporting suggested that clear understandings now existed about parenting decisions for William and Catherine's children. The princess would have final authority over matters involving her children at family events. Other family members would offer support only when explicitly requested. Protection officers had their protocols reinforced regarding the line of succession, and the priority of parental authority over other considerations. These arrangements, like so much in royal life, would never be publicly announced but would govern private interactions going forward. The incident had revealed something uncomfortable about the modern monarchy. Despite all the carefully managed public appearances, the coordinated messages, and the institutional weight of centuries of tradition, royal families were still families. They had the same tensions, the same boundary disputes, the same moments of conflict that affected families everywhere. The difference was that their disputes played out under intense public scrutiny, with every action analyzed for deeper meaning and every relationship examined for signs of trouble. For Camilla, the incident became a defining moment in her journey as queen consort. Despite years of work to rehabilitate her public image, despite her dedication to royal duties and causes, one moment had demonstrated how fragile her acceptance remained. The public had sided overwhelmingly with Catherine, not because of any particular animosity toward Camilla, but because the maternal bond between Camilla and Louis resonated more deeply than considerations of royal rank. It was a harsh lesson in the limits of title and position when confronted with fundamental human relationships. Catherine emerged from the controversy with her public standing enhanced, if anything. Her calm handling of the situation, her refusal to publicly discuss it, and her continued focus on her royal duties demonstrated exactly the qualities that had made her so popular in the first place. She was seen as both modern and appropriate, willing to embrace tradition when it served purpose, but unbending when it came to protecting her children. For a royal family often criticized as out of touch with contemporary values, Catherine represented a bridge between institutional expectations and modern sensibilities. Louis himself, the child at the center of the storm, gradually returned to the normal rhythms of his young life. He attended school, played with his siblings, and made public appearances at appropriate events. His parents carefully monitored how he processed the attention, ensuring that professional support was available if needed. The incident became part of the complex reality of growing up royal in the 21st century, where even childhood moments could become international. News and family dynamics played out on a global stage. The relationship between Catherine and Camilla moved into a new phase characterized by careful politeness and maintained distance. At public events, they continued to appear together as required, exchanging appropriate pleasantries, standing in family groupings when cameras demanded it. But those hoping for warmth or genuine connection were consistently disappointed. The relationship had become purely professional. Two women fulfilling roles that required interaction, but no longer pretending it. Friendship, or familial closeness beyond what was strictly necessary. King Charles found himself repeatedly navigating between his wife and his son's family, a position that weighed heavily on him. Friends and courtiers noted his frustration with a situation that had no perfect resolution. Supporting Camilla was both personal loyalty and institutional necessity, given her position as queen consort. But alienating William, who would one day be king, Catherine, who would be queen, risked far more serious long-term consequences for the monarchy. The delicate balance required constant attention and careful management of every family interaction. The incident also sparked broader conversations about the monarchy's future. Commentators noted that the next generation of royals, represented by William and Catherine, operated with different values and priorities than previous generations. They were more protective of their children's privacy, more willing to assert boundaries, and less deferential to traditional hierarchies when those hierarchies conflicted with their parenting decisions. This represented both an evolution and a challenge for an institution built on hierarchy and tradition. Public discussions about the incident gradually merged into larger debates about the monarchy's role in contemporary Britain. Some argued that moments like these demonstrated exactly why hereditary monarchies were outdated institutions, where family squabbles became national news because people who had never competed for their positions held them by accident of birth. Others contended that the human element of royal families was precisely what maintained public interest and connection, that people related to family tensions even among people living in palaces, Royal expert panels continued analyzing the incident months later, drawing lessons and making predictions about its long-term impacts. Some suggested it marked a permanent shift in the power dynamics within the royal family, with William and Catherine clearly establishing independence and authority over their household. Others saw it as an unfortunate but ultimately minor incident that would fade in significance as time passed, and new events dominated attention. The truth, as is often the case with royal matters, likely lay somewhere between these extremes. For Officer James Mitchell, protection officer who had stepped between the Queen Consort and the young prince, life gradually returned to professional normalcy. His intervention had been discussed endlessly in public forums, but within royal protection circles, it was regarded as exactly correct application of protocol. He continued his duties with the same quiet professionalism that had characterized his entire career. Though he was now known to a public that typically never learned the names of royal protection officers, whether he viewed this notoriety as welcome or burdensome remained known only to him and perhaps two close colleagues who understood the unique pressures of protecting people whose every moment attracted worldwide attention. The story entered the permanent record of royal history. It's documented in books, articles, and eventually in the biographies that would be written about all the principal figures involved. Historians would debate its significance. Was it a crucial turning point that demonstrated shifting power dynamics within the royal family? Or was it an incident blown out of proportion by media coverage, a momentary tension given outsized importance because it fit convenient narratives about family relationships? Future generations would examine the evidence and draw their own conclusions. As the first anniversary of the trooping, the color ceremony approached, preparations began for the next year's event. Palace officials carefully planned the arrangements, applying lessons learned from the previous year. Clear protocols were documented regarding gathering procedures and carriage assignments. Protection officers received refreshed training on handling sensitive family situations, and the family members themselves prepared to once again present the image of unity and tradition that the ceremony demanded. Whatever private feelings remained unresolved, the incident had changed relationships in ways both obvious and subtle. Trust had been broken and would require years to rebuild, if it could be rebuilt at all. Boundaries had been established that would govern future interactions, and everyone involved had been reminded of the peculiar pressure of living life in the public eye, where a moment of family tension could become an international incident and a simple gesture could be interpreted as a declaration of war. In the quiet moments, away from cameras and public scrutiny, each person involved with the incident likely replayed it in their minds, wondering what could have been done differently. What words might have prevented escalation? What alternative choices might have led to different outcomes? But such speculation changed nothing. The moment had occurred. The intervention had happened. The story had been told. All that remained was to live with the consequences and hope that time would soften the edges of hurt, feelings, and damaged relationships. The British monarchy had survived far worse than a dispute over who would escort a 6-year-old prince to a carriage. It had endured abdications, divorces, scandals, and wars. It would survive this as well, adapting as it always had to changing circumstances while maintaining the core traditions that justified its existence. But the incident served as a reminder that beneath the crowns and titles, beneath the ceremony and protocol, royal families were human institutions, vulnerable to all the complications that made families both wonderful and difficult across every level of society. And so life continued at the palace. Ceremonies were held, duties were performed, appearances were maintained. The adults involved played their roles with professional competence, hiding whatever they felt behind the practiced public faces they had all perfected. The children grew, as children do, hopefully protected from the worst of the adult complications that surrounded them. And the world watched, as it always watched the royals, waiting for the next moment of drama, the next glimpse behind the carefully maintained curtain, the next reminder that palaces were homes and crowns were worn by people who laughed, cried, argued, and loved, just like everyone else.